The magical literature of Latin America is perhaps the most authentic in the world, says Garcia Marquez. For us, it begins with the diary of Christopher Columbus. I could not dream up anything more extraordinary than reality itself. I believe that the reality of Latin America must be considered because it offers something new to world literature. Reality in the novel is not life's reality. It's different. Reality in life ends up by copying imagination and dreams. In Big Mama's Funeral, I narrate an inconceivable trip undertaken by the Pope to a Colombian village. 11 years later, the Pope makes a trip to Colombia. Most writers still insist on offering us an immediate reality, which is entirely irrelevant. Yet we live surrounded by fantastic things.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, watch carefully as this old man, Simon Gonzalez, sacrifices.
With 100 years of solitude, I found out that reality also means the people's myths, their beliefs, their legends.
From this height, I will let my back fall, taking full personal responsibility. And in these few seconds, I'll await either death or 10 pesos.
I speak of omens, of folklore, of premonitory beliefs that sustain Latin Americans, offering unique interpretations of things, of everyday events. These beliefs come from our most remote ancestors. I believe that this is the source that leads a writer into magical realism. Herman Vargas, Garcia Marquez's companion in literary circles, and a character in 100 Years of Solitude, explains magical realism in these terms.
I would say that magical realism is something particularly expressive of Caribbean people. And in Colombia, of people living on the North Coast. This magical realism begins in childhood, in those early years when our children listen to adults telling stories. Generally old women who could very well be their grandmother, as in Garcia Marquez's case.
From the grandmother who brought him up, the author used to listen to the most fantastic stories.
Or an old aunt, or a black servant woman with a great deal of imagination, a very rich imagination, who tells old stories to the children, awakening in them that same imagination, that sense of fantasy, that ability for daydreaming.
In Latin America, there are influences from many different cultures which have come together and spread throughout the continent. In the Caribbean, these supernatural elements are part of everyday reality. The creative home of Garcia Marquez is Macondo. Many of his characters either go to Macondo or leave it disappointed. Macondo is not a specific place. It is a group of references, a set of particular places where the author or his family resided at some moment in their lives. Macondo is Aracataca, the town where Garcia Marquez was born. But it is also any town of the Banana Zone, Ciénaga, Barranquilla. It is Cartagena, Sucre, or any other town near the banks of a big and dark river. Macondo is Colombia. It is Latin America. It is a universe. The original inhabitants of Macondo, like the author's grandparents, migrated from La Guajira. The liberal colonel Nicolas Ricardo Marquez and his family abandoned Rio Hacha during the 20s to establish themselves in a town facing the edge of La Sierra Nevada called Aracataca. The Marquezes might have followed the same route as the journey made by the Buendia family, founders of Macondo. Colonel Nicolas Marquez, the writer's grandfather, inspires the story of the child who, led by his grandfather, goes to see the newest invention brought in by the gypsies. Ice. Like La Mama Grande, this grandmother lived and died for her people and their freedom. 100 Years of Solitude is a book based on the experiences of my parents, the people I met during childhood. Popular legends, stories people have told me, newspaper reports, and the research I've done about certain events. That is to say, the novel is constructed of experiences narrated by other people. On the other hand, The Autumn of the Patriarch, written when I was 45 years old, is a book based completely on my personal experiences. Probably my memories or part of my memories. At his grandparents' home, Garcia Marquez met the Guajiros. It was an Indian woman, a Guajira girl, who served as inspiration for the character of Remedios La Bella. As late as this century in Colombia, the Guajiro Indians were bought and sold, according to accounts in this newspaper. The Guajiros were not allowed to register their children's birth in the local parishes. They did not exist as far as the national census was concerned. Even today, the Guajiros remain an isolated group for geographical as well as cultural reasons. They are one of the few Indian groups in Colombia who have been able to escape colonization. The Guajiros are always present in Garcia Marquez's stories. They are introverted, submissive, superstitious. They speak very little and communicate with each other in their native language. In Macondo, they are society's servants, belonging to a social strata lower than that of the blacks. They are like the last link of the chain, and women in particular are the bearers of mystery and foreboding. Garcia Marquez does not emphasize black culture in his stories, despite its great influence in the Caribbean. The Caribbean, nonetheless, is the center of his work. He says, "I was born and raised in the Caribbean, where the black element is very important, but where superstition and beliefs are even stronger. Not long ago, I realized that I was a mulatto. I discovered that in many popular forms of African art, you can find artistic expressions similar to those we have in the Caribbean. The fantastic element in the Caribbean increased when the African slaves were introduced. Their limitless imagination mixed with that of the pre-Columbian natives and later with the Andalusians as well as the Galicians. We've been brought up to believe that our origins were exclusively European, specifically Spanish, which is true to a certain degree. While in Africa, I came across many things that were once part of my childhood and which I had previously thought Spanish. I thought that many of the stories told me by my grandparents were of Colombian origin, but they turned out to be Galician, where my grandparents came from. Galicia is probably the region of Spain where the supernatural element exerts the strongest influence upon society as well as individuals.